Welcome to Growing and Aging Sex Positive.
Or GASP.
Get ready to grow with us as we discuss all things sex and sexuality related.
I'm Nina.
And I'm Cari.
Today we'll be talking about pornography. What is it? Why should we care? And not just why should we care, but why should you care too?
We want to hear from you. What is on your mind? What questions or thoughts do you have about sex and sexuality? We will share questions and replies in a future episode. Write to us at gasppod@gmail.com. That's GASPPOD@gmail.com. First, we want to thank our sponsor, Oak Park Our Whole Lives. Oak Park OWL has classes for kids in 1st, 5th, and 8th grade in the Greater West Side of Chicagoland area. Classes start in September and January each year. For more information, please go to their website at www.opowl.org.
Now let's get into it.
Hi folks, welcome to GASP. So as always, in prep for this episode, I think that our starting point was a definition.
And we love to start with a definition and then just blow it up.
Yeah,
right? Like,
love to pick it apart.
Any definition, as often is the case, right? You start with a definition and then it starts leading you in the direction of more questions. So one definition that we could start with, this is something that we use with our kids in our sex ed program. Media that depicts sexual activity or behavior, which is created as entertainment for adults, not educational material.
I love that caveat. So a couple things out the gate there. My first thought is that it's not 100% what I'm thinking of when I think of the word porn. What's included in that definition is definitely a wider net of media and content than is when I hear the word porn or pornography.
So what other types of media might we want to include in our might apply?
Yeah, so that definition, because it's pretty wide, would definitely include things like internet pornography, so videos of people having sex or solo sex acts. It could also include text like romance or erotica,
yes.
Any audio, streaming audio, erotic stories. It could also include anything that is not created under like the socially acceptable version of porn and is not moderated or restricted. So I'm thinking of things like advertisements and Instagram posts that are definitely sexy and sexual imagery, but I don't think most of us would say are pornographic.
And they're certainly not restricted access, like you were saying.
For sure.
So we definitely want to, I would want to add to this definition that the depiction or the media that depicts the sexual activity is intended for arousal purposes.
Yeah.
Rather than, say, education or instruction, for example.
For sure.
Now, that would still include things like advertisements as well as romance novels.
Yeah, so you're thinking about kind of a carve out and a separation for things like, for example, the anatomical drawings and images that we might use in a community sex ed class.
Yes, very important. A sex education book that shows the different parts of the body, right, is not pornography.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And then the other kind of category of things that are in my mind are, for example, like art, paintings and sculpture that definitely depict nudity, but we don't restrict. I would be okay with taking a minor to the Art Institute in downtown Chicago. There's certainly nudity. Some of it's sensual, may or may not be arousing, but I don't think that it would be controversial to say that a nude painting is not necessarily pornographic.
always fun to explore these definitions and their strengths and limitations. Before we go further, I want to pause and acknowledge that this can be a really hard subject for a lot of people, and it can be difficult in a lot of ways. There's a lot of taboo and shame around pornography specifically.
Absolutely. And I guess I'll add to that I don't find shame to be helpful in an education space. I also think that it muddies the waters and makes it really hard to find good data and research on these topics. And it would be my goal to have it be like a more morally neutral topic, and that listeners and everyone can explore their own values with pornography without an added layer of shame. And what I specifically mean by that is that when I was researching definitions of pornography and trying to dive into this subject, it's really overwhelming, and often your first Google hits come from opinion pieces and often politicized or other like group affiliated religious, etc. Institutions that have really specific ideas about values about porn, which may or may not align with ours as individuals. That taboo and stigma is pretty extreme with pornography.
Right. And while I'm not a morally neutral person, and I don't consider anyone to be morally neutral, I think that point of that shame is not useful in an educational context.
Yeah.
Is really important to start with, right? And to reflect on, right? In order to even develop or have a morally responsible stance on a topic like pornography, we need to be able to discuss it from a more neutral starting place.
I love that. Yeah, I love that carve out. You're kind of saying that one of the first things that comes up for me is this sort of like gap that we have socially. I feel like when you say porn or pornography, I think many adults have an image of like free internet porn, typically heterosexual, often depicting sex between a person with a penis and a person with a vulva, and kind of bucket that as porn. And that's like the only thing that you think about when you think about porn often. And there's sort of this idea that that's like widespread and almost normalized, but then it's also up against this extreme stigma and taboo, which I personally find makes this topic a little difficult, because there's this social idea that like, everybody watches porn, it's super normal, it's everywhere, it's free on the internet. And then also this like kind of cloud of deep shame. Porn is terrible, all of it is bad. And it's really kind of a confusing paradox there.
It is a really funny dichotomy that we seem to have both of these assumptions culturally. Right?
Yeah.
These are both, porn is both normal and shameful.
Yeah.
And at the same time.
And I definitely find, just on a personal note, that made this topic, when we were just like thinking about topics for the podcast and trying to research them, hard for me to research. It was really hard to find good educational information about pornography. So I guess that's kind of a good starting point. So I touched a little bit on this when I talked, I'm not sure if I used the word mainstream porn, or I talked about what I quote, most people I generalize think about when they think about porn. Do you think that's a fair statement or a fair generalization? Is there a space to talk about sort of, quote, mainstream porn?
I think that is what maybe our definition will help us with, to just try to identify this sort of general description of what counts. At the same time, as we were just saying, our in our exploration of that definition, it might take us further than what is generally understood to be included as pornography. Maybe pornography as restricted material, restricted access material.
Yeah, so for today, I think we're focusing on pornography as a restricted material, and I'm not so much thinking about other media. Okay.
It might come up again. I mean, I think romance novels, right? They're a really interesting place to sort of compare and contrast.
Yeah. So, did we want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, let's get into that, because that's something that we could, it's a close cousin in some ways.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I've been interested in is, I'd say in the last couple of years, I've anecdotally seen and heard that things like romance books, literature, audio erotica, particularly streaming services targeted at women, that market has grown significantly. Now, I tried to find some research to back up what I was seeing out in the world and on social media, and it was a little difficult because most of the people that were producing data about that market were the companies themselves that are producing and distributing this material. But certainly, like, the category of romance literature and romance novels has grown in the last 5 years. And there's several new startups that are by women, for women, audio erotica.
I got to tell you, Cari, when I am playing my solitaire game on my phone, and there's a pause and this ad comes up for an audio experience or a
I love that's so diffuse. I love that. An audio experience. I think I want an audio experience.
That is definitely some kind of story about a woman who's involved with a werewolf pack.
I get that one too.
Yes, you know exactly what I mean.
I know exactly. I've gotten some video ones too.
It really gives the impression that this particular area is a growth area.
Yeah. For sure. And we are in their target demographic.
I'm just playing Spider Solitaire. Thank you, though. Werewolves.
So you don't want an erotic story about a group of werewolves. I definitely get those too. I also was a little bit on like Book Talk, and I got a lot of they call them dark romance genre, which is, I don't want to, there's no judgment at all, and I'm not like heavily knowledgeable or expert in this area. But what's interesting about the dark romance is that they're definitely targeted at women, definitely erotic, but they're really fantasy based, which is one of the interesting things that when I was researching for this podcast came up for me. And it's sort of non-scientific research, but just this idea that a lot of that type of media is targeted towards women, like in lieu of videos and images that would be targeted towards the, quote, male gaze. And something that came up was the idea that that's because women tend to be interested in and aroused by like scenario-specific fantasies. So it kind of makes sense that like text and audio would have more character development and more stuff going on than just the sex acts. So I thought that was kind of an interesting cultural phenomenon. Definitely
the sort of generalization that we'd like to hear more research on.
Yes.
But also kind of anecdotally seems to check out. Women tend to respond to text, maybe audio as well, depictions of sexual activity. And men tend to respond more to the visual images.
Yeah, I've heard that too. What's also just came up for me that I think is important, just overarching across this whole topic, a lot of what we're talking about is sort of anecdotal and opinion-based and just our like social observations. And one of the things that I found when I was looking for data is just that because this is entertainment, so all of this media is being produced as entertainment for profit, it is really hard to find good data, right? Like it's a challenge. So I think that's important to kind of know.
To continue with the compare and contrast of pornography with the romance novel genre, I find the cultural evaluations of these genres, the differences between those to be really fascinating.
I do too, and I'll go on record. And what I was dancing around when I was talking about dark romance is that, so I guess I'll say prior to sort of 2020 pandemic time, when I started kind of consuming a lot more like social media and TikTok, because that's how I engaged with the world. If you said romance to me, a romance novel, I thought of like penny romances that like elderly women, like the little thick paperback books with like a kind of like Fabio looking man with flowing hair and like a flowing blouse with his shirt ripped open, holding a woman in the wind. That's what I thought of if you said romance novel. And it was definitely considered a bit lowbrow, but it also wasn't hidden, right? That wasn't super heavily stigmatized like in my life.
Maybe kind of taboo, but not the kind of shame that we assign to pornography.
Yeah, certainly not like hidden and secret. And if I saw someone holding one, it was like, oh my God, it wasn't shielded from me as a child. Like none of that sort of stigma and shame was packed in there. But then when I started kind of getting into this corner of social media, and they'll read excerpts from these books, to be clear, these like romance novels are often very kinky, very explicit sexually, right? Like they're not a romance story, like a rom-com of, you know, they are sexual and they are explicit. And certainly appear to be written with the intent to arouse and satisfy. So it's an interesting, I think, social place that we find ourselves in, that like, that's just romance and erotica, but all the rest of this is porn, right?
We use this word romance as if people aren't taking their clothes off.
Right.
It's just candles.
Right.
Right.
And what that kind of made me think of just now is, so we've kind of talked about this idea that like men are more aroused by and interested in imagery. And then like, what does that say about the social sexual script that like sexually explicit material that like involves a lot of character development doesn't really count as pornography, but these images without a lot of context or emotion or character development are lewd? It's a little bit, it's another dichotomy, right? Like it just doesn't quite click for me.
So we've been talking about, or referencing kind of throughout our conversation so far, the moral questions about pornography. Is porn moral? Is it moral to partake in pornography? Or what sort of value judgments do we make about that? And that's something that we each have a responsibility to decide for ourselves as individual adult humans in our society. Morality is something that no one else can decide for you, right?
So what I hear you kind of saying is that there's an ethical evaluation that needs to be done on an individual level about what kind of porn you want to consume, if any, and how it factors into your life.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
And that's just part of living a responsible life, I think. And we've been talking throughout. I mean, one consideration that's relevant to that judgment is that pornography is involved in arousal, or one way to experience arousal, and we start with the assumption that arousal is a healthy and good part of life.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to our tenet on pleasure is a good part of life, right? Like there's
absolutely
pleasure is a huge and important factor in human sexuality and sexual behavior.
Yeah, and then so I think that is one consideration that supports pornography as a morally appropriate activity. And then maybe one of the main concerns about pornography morally would have to do with the objectification, especially of women.
Yeah.
So some pros and cons, so to speak, and we each have a responsibility to decide for ourselves how to how to make those judgments and evaluations. It does raise a bigger question of the possibility of ethical pornography.
Yeah.
Yeah. So ethical pornography, including all kinds of things, right? But for example, there's feminist pornography, or what's called feminist porn, that is created by and for women.
Yeah.
So that is out there as one of those options if you are looking for ethical porn or porn that is consistent with your values in some way.
I love that.
By the way, there are so many more criteria, right, that people might consider, and we're curious what you think about this. So, what criteria do you have for ethical pornography, if even that is a possibility in your view?
Yeah.
Send us an email. We'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about this topic is that people do have very like broad perspectives that come from really different value sets. And I think that I haven't found a super safe space to explore those or even like explore maybe what my values would be, because it's just such a polarizing topic. So I think it would be great to hear people's assessments and what they're looking for in ethical pornography, or if that's a consideration for them, or where their kind of boundaries are.
Yeah. And it, for me, any questions about morality or ethics have to start from this place of open-mindedness and kind of even-handedness, right? Being ready to hear from different perspectives and different reasons. And I do think with pornography, as with many aspects of sexuality, it can be hard to get to that place of an educational space, right, where the mind is open to reflection, and that's part of what this is about and what we're for, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the work. That's where the work certainly is for me.
We wanted to share another aspect of pornography, or maybe part of our learning about pornography. We did say earlier, and we do primarily, like, I think it's very important to say that porn is not educational. It is not realistic. But at the same time, as adults and, able to engage in critical reflection and analysis of cultural artifacts, right? There is room for learning from watching pornography. So long as you do it with the understanding that we are analyzing cultural artifacts that are created with certain intentions.
Wow, I love that framing, Nina. I really like the idea of a cultural artifact. I think it gives a lot of breathing room to learning something from the viewing without, like you said, making the mistake of thinking it was created with the intent to educate, because I think that that's a really important distinction. And I think it allows for some like positive experiences with pornography that are not steeped in morality.
It can be, analyzing communication, right, is such a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
And why would pornography be any different, right?
Yeah.
So I've shared about this experience on the podcast before, or other aspects of this experience, but last summer I took a class called SAR. Now I always have to think back what the S and the A and the R stand for. Sexuality.
Acronyms are difficult,
attitude reassessment.
Oh, I like that. It does sound very clinical, though. It sounds like procedural almost.
Yeah.
Can I sign up for an SAR, a sexual attitude readjustment? Put my name on a list for that procedure.
A little surgery there.
Yeah. Readjust my attitude.
Just outpatient.
Yeah. Just a tune-up.
Yeah.
Be a great way to solve any sexuality dilemmas right there.
Just like taking a pill.
Yeah,
right?
fix it.
There's this model of medicalization. Anyway, so this is a class that is for sexuality, people who work in the field of sexuality, whether they're educators or counselors or therapists. And it is intended to be an experience for sex professionals to kind of reflect on our own experiences, our own biases.
Yeah.
Right. And in a way that helps us do our job better.
Yeah,
right?
I love that.
Because, of course, all of us, educators, therapists, counselors have our own experiences and biases. And it's important to be aware of those as a way of kind of being able to set them aside. So it's typical of a SAR, as they're called, to include viewing pornography together. And in my case, this was, in a hotel conference room. It like
very sexy,
full on, very, very abstract, professional. Very like fluorescent lights. Conference tables, that kind of thing. So it's an educational experience, right?
In all the ways, probably.
Yeah.
Like there's probably a lot of meanings to that. In what ways it's educational?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but one of those things is that just being in a room in a sort of professional setting, viewing porn together.
Yeah.
What an interesting way to kind of, maybe you're experiencing arousal and you're also like managing your experience of that arousal at the same time. Or maybe there's maybe it's not arousal you're feeling.
Yeah,
maybe
there's
shame, a lot of
repulsion, discomfort.
Yeah,
all the things.
Yeah. But at the same time, again, like managing it. And also, right, like there's an expansion too.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know that these ways of making pornography were out there, or that this was how people enjoy sex.
Yeah.
So definitely educational in its own way.
I love that. And what you said makes me think of, I have not had an experience of watching pornography in a professional context, or particularly like in an educational one. But I have had an experience about watching pornography with other people in a non-sexual context.
Do tell.
And expansive was the intent of it. So I actually was taken on a first date.
That's bold.
This is a true story, folks. I was taken on a first date and invited to a film festival put on by Dan Savage, and I think it's annual, and it's called the Hump Film Festival. And it is a collection of short amateur pornography. And it showcases... so I hate these labels, but sometimes they're the only labels I can think. It doesn't showcase a lot of like vanilla pornography and sex. It's with the intention is to be expansive and provide people with an opportunity to understand how other people experience sexual joy. So it's a lot of kink and really niche kink and niche sexual interests, very like body positive, all different types of bodies, all different genders, all different genitals, queer friendly, sex positive. And the one that I went to, I can remember before I went in being like, am I insane? I'm going to go to the Music Box Theater and I'm just going to pop in and buy a ticket and watch porn with all these people. And I don't know if you've been to that Vintage Theater, but like you are like packed like sardines. Like I was making physical contact with the person in the seat next to me, not like intentionally, right? But like we're, calf close to calf because it's that close. And I remember Dan Savage does like a little intro before the films start playing, and he really specifically articulates that this is an opportunity. Like if you may not be disgusted, that's like a ground rule. You can't like utter disgust. It's not a mockery. You're not making fun of how the people are having sex and what the topics are. And if you are experiencing discomfort, his challenge to the audience was to sit with that and view it and maybe try to think about why that was so uncomfortable for you. And it was really interesting, and it was a little confronting. But I learned so many cool things that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't watched those films. And they're so intimate because they're real amateur film. It's like really vulnerable. And like so much more human than what I think when I think about kind of like mainstream pornography. It isn't deeply human or intimate, right? Like those aren't words that sort of like are tied to it, but in this context it was like kind of cool to see how other people are doing it. And I think it also provides, I've had conversations with other people since, because it provides a common dialogue and a way to talk about pornography and sexual interests that's not about my sexual interests. So I found it really, like you said, expansive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I should have said that in my SAR also, I think our teachers did a really good job of selecting responsibly made pornography with where healthy interactions are depicted, sometimes very artistic, or different body different types of bodies, different body abilities, and so on, and some really challenging videos as well. Yeah.
I would definitely say that there were challenging videos at the Hump Film Festival, depending on your personal feelings. Some of them were really confrontational,
but what a wonderful way to share humanity, as you were saying, in ways that you might not ever choose to explore on your own time, right?
Yeah,
in your own sexual experience. But this is a way to kind of understand others in a special way.
Yeah, and I guess to put it bluntly, I wasn't personally like aroused or interested in really any of the things that I saw on screen. So it was a really cool, I feel like it's very, it's deeply human. I can only live in my body, and I only experience my own sexuality, like with the experiences and behaviors that I have. So I feel like it's really deeply human to wonder how other people are doing it, and to have that sort of curiosity. Like I feel like that tracks with just if you want to know. And so it's a window into how other people enjoy their sexuality.
And your sense is that the people around you were experiencing it in a similar way.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I didn't query the audience, or really just like I wouldn't talk to anybody in the audience about how they felt about any other type of film or performance. You're definitely aware that you're in a space with other people. I did recommend the film festival to some other friends, and I think it streams online, and they had really different viewing experiences because they watched it at home, like on their computer. But I definitely think that I was aware that I was in the theater with other people, and I think that added to the humanity of it. But there was no laughter or like discomfort that I was aware of, and everyone was really respectful of this space. So I didn't feel, there were all kinds of people of, apparently all different like cultures and backgrounds, and there wasn't any like laughter. There were definitely things that were on screen that in a different context, I could see people laughing from discomfort, and nobody did that, which it was a really healthy experience.
That's really, sounds amazing.
It was, yeah. I'm glad I did it. You never know when you're going into such a like wild experience if it's going to be. I always have this sensation in like sexuality and sexuality education spaces is you don't know until you're in it how you're going to react sometimes. And so it's nice to have sort of like wild and expansive experiences that feel grounding, human, connected.
So there's a lot of potential for in pornography for this sort of human expansion of understanding.
Yeah.
that goes well beyond, I think, what the sort of stereotype about pornography is.
Yeah. And I'm just revisiting what you said about it being a cultural artifact, and I think that's such a healthy, like, fun lens to view it in. Like, take what works for you and recognize that it's socially and culturally informed, and leave what doesn't work for you. Like, it doesn't actually have to be any deeper than that. It can be like, well, that's not for me, and just leave it there. So.
Well, great. This has been a really fun time talking about pornography with you, Cari. There are so many more topics and questions that I know we discussed in preparation for this episode. And so I'm sure we will be coming back to it
for sure.
At a later episode.
Yeah, and I guess I'll go back to your call to our audience that please share your thoughts. Shoot us an email. If you have ideas, topics, thoughts, or things to share that are in the realm of pornography or anything else sexuality related.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for spending time with us today. Don't forget, we would like to hear from you. What do you think of today's episode? What questions or thoughts do you have about sex and sexuality? We will share some questions and replies in a future episode. Write to us at gasppod@gmail.com. That's GASPPOD@gmail.com.
GASP is a joint venture between Dancing Elm Consulting and Cari Hypes.
That's right. And also thank you to Motion Post Inc. for editing, and to the Oak Park Public Library for providing the audio booth.
Thanks also to our sponsor, Oak Park Our Whole Lives. Oak Park OWL delivers comprehensive, inclusive sexuality education to youth and families in the Greater West Side of the Chicagoland area. For more information, check out their website at www.opowl.org.
Take care of yourself and others. Talk to you soon.